Hello friends, and welcome back to the Mothership. Today we're smoking up a brisket flat. Let's get started. Now the first question for many of you guys seeing this video is, why the heck would you smoke just a brisket flat? Well, for many folks in this country, specifically those who live in a major city, a brisket flat might be the only thing you can find. Now you can 100% find a full packer brisket on the internet. There's a bunch of websites and a bunch of different companies that have really good meats for very decent prices, whether you're going from choice up through prime or Wagyu if you really want to. But just going to your local grocery store in many major cities, it's very difficult to find a whole packer brisket. But for example, in the Northeast, I found that if you're trying to find a full packer brisket, unless you're going to like Costco or the equivalents, it's almost impossible to find. But what I can find at basically every single grocery store is a piece of brisket flat. Now from what I found, it's usually not even the entire flat. We're talking like big segments, maybe 2 pounds through 5 pounds, but it's basically just pieces of the flat. And if you are getting new into smoking and you just bought your pellet smoker or an offset, or you just want to do it on a charcoal, you really want to do brisket. I mean, that is the king of barbecue, right? And if you can only find these pieces of a flat, you should be able to cook it too. And I'm going to show you how to do it here. It's obviously not the optimal cut. Guys, a full packer brisket is not that difficult. You can find them online. I highly recommend doing a full packer brisket. And I'm gonna link how I do a full brisket right here. But let's do a brisket flat. I haven't cooked one of these in a very long time, but I'm just gonna follow the same method I do for a full packer. Now, obviously we have a different amount of fat on this and we're gonna be at the mercy of whoever decided to cut it and trim it for us. But I am excited to see how it turns out, so let's take our first step.
Now, first things first, let's see what we're working with here. Here's our brisket flat. It kind of looks like they did a bit of a hack job cutting it up. A little thin on one side, definitely shredded the fat cap a bit. So I'm going to do a very light takeoff here. Like I said, they took off more than I probably would have, but of course they put the fat side down in the container. Now on the meat side, I'm usually just careful. I don't want any pooling. So any low spots like this are probably gonna be a problem, but I think we can probably plump it up a little bit when we put it on, protect that a little bit. Yeah, it's not gonna be a lot of protection from the meat. And it looks like they trimmed what they did leave on to the right height. So we're gonna have to work with this. I always cook my briskets fat side towards the heat source, which on my smoker is going to be down. So the bald spots are just going to get hotter, but they're not going to pool or anything like that. So we're gonna have to stick with this. Now, if yours had more even fat distribution or the fat cap still on it, the usual rules apply. We want to take all the funky fat off of the meat side, and then on the fat cap side, if this was a full cut, you'd have a nice big section of fat, and you'd want to take it down while leaving a layer on here of about 1/4 inch to 1/8 of an inch, somewhere within there. And then I usually cut off anything really thin, which honestly, I might have to take a little bit of this off here. Right like so. Because that is just way too thin, and I'm not sure that that's gonna cook right. And now, just like all of my briskets, the first thing that I do is I salt it. I get the salt on there, I let it sit in the fridge and absorb into the meat. And then that allows me to control the amount of salt that's going into this animal and make it so I can have a more even bark because there's no salt that's being absorbed and leaving empty spots. So just give it a coating. The salt gets absorbed in the fat, might just end up coming off because the fat's going to render. So I focus less on the fat cap side and more on the meat side. I usually do a ratio of about a 1/2 teaspoon per pound of meat. This is about 3.5 pounds, so I'm doing about 1 3/4 teaspoons of salt. Kosher salt, that is. Don't go table salt. It would be way too much salt. Perfect. Now all we're gonna do is just put this into the fridge as is and let it sit until all the salt gets absorbed, and then we can move forward with putting on any other ingredients that we want, like black peppers, garlic, etc. A little less than an hour later, and you can see that all the salt has been absorbed. So we're gonna move ahead with actually getting this thing rubbed down. Now, you could use a binder here. It's actually kind of wet, so I don't think you really need one. I'm going to use one this time just because I don't really ever experiment with pickle juice, but I wanted to give pickle juice a try. So I'm just gonna pour a little bit on here. Rub it in. And I'm starting with the fat cap, because fat cap on my smoker is going to go down, which means it has the highest likelihood of everything falling off. So I'm going to start with the bottom because I care more about the meat side. And what I'm going to do is just take some coarse black pepper, coat it all over. Pat it in. And then my other ingredient that I always use is minced garlic. I'm just going to do the same. Then we're going to flip her over and do the same thing. A little bit of pickle juice. Get it all on there. Get some black pepper. Nice coating. Get our minced garlic. And then, as always guys, make sure you put some effort into the sides. A lot of surface area on a brisket. You can, if you miss it, you're missing out on a lot. Now on the meat side, I tend to actually put a little bit of garlic powder. You might think that this is going overboard with garlic, which is fine if you're not a big garlic fan. I am going to add some, but I tend to be a little heavy on the garlic amount, so your mileage might vary. Give it a nice pat down all over. Now what you can do is put this back in the fridge for the rest of the day, overnight, a couple hours, or you can throw it on right away. I tend to put it into the fridge, usually overnight to be honest, to let it all come together. Or if I'm prepping around noon and I plan to put it on at like 9 p.m. for a full brisket, since it's a brisket flat, I'm actually just gonna throw it on just as is. So I'm getting the smoker up to temp. We're gonna start this cook at 180 degrees because pellet smokers put out the most amount of smoke at low temperatures. So if your pellet smoker has a smoke setting or just 180 degrees in like a pro mode or a smoking mode, that's what we wanna do. And we're gonna leave it on there for a couple of hours. So let's get it out onto the smoker. Now I've been running for about 2.5 hours like this, but let me show you my setup. So basically I have our brisket on the top rack, like I said, fat side down, and I put a metal tin underneath it. That's accomplishing two things. One, it's deflecting the heat. So there's a little bit less heat coming onto that kind of shoddy fat job they did. And it's also gonna collect any liquids. I don't have any trimmings from here, which I usually use to make tallow and then pour on top when I wrap it. But I'm hoping maybe I'll get some liquid here. Again, 180 degrees. And this piece of meat will probably stop taking in smoke around somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. And at that point, I'm gonna bump the temperature up to a working temp of 225. So about 3.5 hours later, and our brisket is probably gonna not take on any more smoke, so we can get it up to a little bit more temperature. So I just bumped it to 225. And to be honest, this flat is looking a little drier than it usually does. Maybe that's just the amount of fat they pulled off. So I've just begun spritzing it with a light beer, and I'll do that probably about every half an hour or so. Until we get to the stall, and then we wrap it. Stall is usually about 165-ish, somewhere in there. So we're just gonna monitor it and let it keep chugging along. We're about 6.5 hours in, and our brisket has stalled. I'm gonna wrap it and then put it back on at a higher temperature. I'm gonna wrap it in tallow, which I have tons of. If you don't have any tallow, honestly, some butter will probably work. Clarified butter would work better. You could use lard, you could use anything that's just gonna add more fat back on here. So I'm just gonna wrap it. You could also wrap this in tin foil if that's all you have. I'd like to use butcher paper because it does allow it to breathe a little bit, so it doesn't just, you know, steam our brisket, which I don't really want to do, but that would actually work. I am going to put this back on, but first I'm going to bump my smoker up to 250 degrees. And then we are going to just let it run until it probes tender. That's the important part. The temperature will be somewhere between 195 and 203, but we're looking for it to probe nice and tender. So let's throw it back on and wait till it's done. All right, this just got pulled off the smoker. On the left side, we were looking over 200 degrees. The right side, about 197. But most importantly, everything was probing nice and smooth, which is what you're looking for. You're looking for it to go in and out and not have a lot of resistance. So what I'm going to do now is wrap it in this towel. And then what you can do here is based on what you have available. I just got some stuff shipped in the mail in this styrofoam container, so I'm gonna put it in this. You can put it into a roto cooler, which is my usual go-to, or just a toaster oven, regular oven, whatever you want.
But the most important thing is we rest it. So we're gonna let it rest for hour, 2 hours, as long as you can rest it. Up to 12 hours actually will work just fine. Anything more than an hour is probably okay. But in reality, the most important part of a brisket cook after getting it to the right temp is the rest. It lets everything come back together. And let's find out how this brisket flat does with a good rest and a good cook. All right, let's see how we did. Whew. You know, I say that's probably okay. Whew, that's warm. If we want to look at the smoke rings and stuff on this, oh my, we got a nice red color all over here. This is looking great. Probably a really good piece of chew on. That's yummy. So with rest, we are looking at 10 hours on this brisket flat, which honestly is not that much longer than a small full packer. Guys, again, I don't want to beat the dead horse, but you should do a full brisket. If you can't find one because of grocery stores not having what you need to, you can buy online. But if your only option is to smoke a brisket flat, pretty sure this is gonna be really good. Yeah, it tastes like a brisket flat, guys. Personally, I love the point more than the flat. I love that fatty tissue because when I'm cooking a brisket, I really want something spectacular, and I can get this out of many cuts of meat. What I like is the point side of the brisket. But if it's your first time cooking anything and this is all you can find, you can make a really, really good brisket, and I just showed you how to do it. Guys, have you ever cooked just a brisket flat? Let me know down below. Let me know your favorite way to cook smaller cuts of brisket. As always, guys, let me know your thoughts down below and cook something fantastic.